Welcome to The Explainer. Okay, today we are setting the stage for a truly fascinating dive into 19th century Korean philosophy. We're going to explore a profound shift in thought that happened during a time of immense, and I mean immense, social upheaval. We'll be looking at the birth of a movement known as Donghak, unpacking some complex ideas like liminality, and discovering how this historical period sparked what scholars call autogenesis modernity, which is basically a self-sustaining form of modern thought.
Now, I know what you might be thinking. It sounds like a massive stretch, doesn't it? Can a 19th century mystical revelation actually solve the ideological crises of the modern world? We live in an era defined by drawn borders, rigid categories, and deep structural crises. But as you'll see, sometimes looking back at how a past society entirely dismantled and reconstructed its own worldview can offer us the exact blueprint we need to find meaning and structural solutions today.
Okay, let's dive right into our structure for today. First, we'll look at the crisis in Joseon society, then explore Suwon's great heavenly revelation, break down this idea of the sky above the sky, compare Donghak with Western learning, unpack the power of liminality, and finally wrap it all up with modern lessons from Donghak.
All right, Section 1, Crisis in Joseon Society.
Picture this. It's the late Joseon dynasty, and the old ideological framework has basically hit a brick wall. Society was governed by orthodox Neo-Confucianism, which relied heavily on a concept called Ibyok-chun, a very strict, distant, and rules-based view of heaven. But as the era became more turbulent and totally new problems started popping up, this rigid traditional order completely failed to provide answers. Society just became stagnant. They were desperately in need of a philosophical revolution.
Which brings us to Section 2, Sun's great heavenly revelation.
The sheer scale of the timeline here is just mind-blowing. The founder of Donghak, a man named Choi Jae-woo, who is widely known as Soo-eun, spent nearly 40 years of his life engaged in intense, hard work, struggle, and deep seeking. And it all culminated on one specific day, April 5, 1860. On this exact date, he experienced his first revelation and a direct meeting with Sangjae, the Heavenly Lord. But here's the thing. It wasn't just a fleeting vision. What makes this so unique in religious history is that this sparked a highly detailed spiritual conversation that lasted for 6 whole months. Over the following year, he meticulously recorded these angelic questions and answers in 2 core scriptures, the Dongyong Daejeon and the Yeongdam Yusa.
To really humanize this history, just listen to this incredible first-hand quote from Solon describing that exact moment. He writes, "Unexpectedly, my heart became excited and my body trembled. He hears a voice telling him not to be afraid, saying, 'People in the world call me Sangjae, but do you not know Sangjae?' It's a visceral, overwhelming, and deeply personal reaction, and you have to understand, from the perspective of the Orthodox establishment at the time, claiming this kind of direct, unmediated contact with the supreme power was highly unusual, and quite frankly, incredibly heretical."
So, let's move to Section 3, the sky above the sky.
Okay, there is a dense but absolutely crucial term you need to know here, Sichanju. Simply put, it's the core concept of Donghak. It translates to directly worshiping or communicating with the heaven above, what they call Chen o Yochen. Unlike the old system that relied on rigid tradition and this distant set of universal rules, Sichanju was all about direct, empowering access to the outside world. It was the spark for what we call self-sustaining or autogenous modernity.
When you compare the two side by side, the shift is just monumental. The old guard, Neo-Confucianism's Ibyok-chun, was this distant, rules-based heaven that honestly felt pretty disconnected from daily life. In stark contrast, Donghak introduced a radical new perspective, Chan-o-chan, the sky above the sky. It wasn't about blindly following a strict hierarchy. It prioritized direct communication and stepping into a non-polar perspective, entirely free of extremes. It fundamentally shifted where people looked for answers, moving them away from a rigid rulebook and toward a direct, living connection.
Moving right along to Section 4, Donghak versus Western learning.
Now, to truly grasp Donghak's unique identity, we have to look at its rivalry with encroaching Western learning, primarily Catholicism, which was known as Sohak. Donghak taught that while the fortune is one and the way is the same, the principle is completely different. Think about it. Western learning relied on a strict separation of priests and believers, focusing heavily on prayer for one's own self-interest. Donghak, meanwhile, was all about condensing heavenly energy right into the body through deep water purification and natural change, or what they called inaction. In fact, Donghak openly critiqued Western learning, basically saying it had form but completely lacked true substance.
All right, Section 5, the power of liminality. Let's break down this complex sociological term, liminality. It's essentially a borderline state. Think of it as the ultimate blurring of strict traditional lines. It's a transformative phase where boundaries transition, old hierarchies, like strict gender rankings, are completely rearranged, and the existing stagnant order is dismantled so it can be reconstructed into something entirely new.
So how did they do it? Well, by prioritizing direct communication with the sky above the sky, Donghak actually dismantled the firm, rigid wall separating the sacred from the profane. It allowed everyday people to experience profound sacredness right in the middle of their ordinary, worldly reality. It literally transformed the boundaries of what was considered holy.
But here is the really cool part. Donghak didn't just smash old ideas and leave a massive vacuum. Actually, scratch that. It did the exact opposite. It achieved true liminality by seamlessly blending the strengths of diverse East Asian traditions. It pulled from the energy concepts of Confucianism, the mantra practices of Taoism, and the mindfulness of Buddhism. It didn't reject the past. It wove it all together into an entirely new, independent path.
Which leads us to our final section, number 6, Modern Lessons from Donghak.
So what is the big takeaway for us today? First, Donghak is a powerful historical model for autogenous modernity, meaning modernizing from within rather than just awkwardly copying from the outside. Second, its liminal nature teaches us how to transcend the stubborn boundaries we literally still fight over today: tradition versus modernity, East versus West, religion versus science. Third, from a practical standpoint, it offers a fascinating solution to modern mental crises through concepts like Sushim Jungi, the active training of the mind and righteous energy. It invites a worldview based not on brute force, but on harmony, creative change, and natural action.
And that brings us to consilience. This is what Donghak's view of heaven ultimately achieved, a beautifully integrated thought process that encompasses and then completely transcends all boundaries. It reorganizes the inner and outer worlds, embracing the strengths of the past while fiercely prioritizing a direct lived connection right here in the present.
So, I want to leave you with this final thought to ponder. In our modern world, a world that is still so heavily obsessed with drawing borders, erecting walls, and endlessly arguing over rigid categories, what could we achieve if we stopped looking at the rules and finally looked to the sky above the sky? Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer. Keep questioning the boundaries around you, and as always, keep learning.